Hey friends, if you're new here and just happen to click on this video, here's the usual disclaimer. This isn't a commentary channel, I just like to talk about things sometimes. And the main thing I want to talk about today is accessibility in gaming. Whenever I'm trying to keep up with gaming news and events, it crosses my radar and I feel compelled to add my 2 cents. Now, I'm not going to touch on every single possible inch of this discussion, I don't want to. I'm just talking about my opinion. And as always, you can feel free to disagree. I'm also hoping this won't be as long as some of my other vlogs, but you know keeping things short is a coin in the wishing well around these parts. Let's start with the word accessibility. There are 2 definitions, and remember I just said I'm sharing my opinion, so whenever I make statements like that, feel free to add the phrase, in my opinion. In my opinion, there are 2 definitions of the word accessibility. One falls under usability, where it measures the technical function and presentation of a thing in terms of how well a person can use it to do the thing it's meant to do. And the goal of usability, I think, is to make performing tasks as clear and efficient as possible. It's not really about the best way to do things, it's more about the best way to do things given the way humans are. And humans are, among other things, pretty lazy. And listen, I know people get up in arms about that word, but I'm not making a value judgment here. It just is what it is. The average person leans into things that take the least amount of time and effort, mentally and physically. That's why we've adopted the concept of convenience, preferring things that fit our wants and needs in ways that don't cause us too much trouble. But that drive towards getting the most for the least can be influenced by culture and environment or special interests. Take climbing a mountain. It's extremely difficult and time-consuming, but that's the point of doing it. Taking a helicopter up, because it's more convenient, would defeat the purpose. Then there are people who subscribe to religious beliefs or philosophies of wellness that value putting time and effort into things specifically because the desire for the quickest, easiest way is seen as unhealthy or counter to your enlightenment. You might also be in a setting where a certain level of convenience isn't necessary to maintain your way of life, though I don't think that applies to most so-called developed countries, since convenience is the backbone of modernization. But this vlog isn't about any of that stuff, okay? I'm talking about how a thing works. And when it comes to how a thing works, usability is king. Is something quick and easy to learn, to use, to remember how to use? Does it do what you expect it to do? Does it do it as efficiently and as well as you expect it to? I see it as a cultural quirk that usability is exclusively called accessibility when talking about users with disabilities specifically. They're essentially the same thing, only the word accessibility places more emphasis on how many different types of users a thing is usable for versus how usable it is for the average person, if that makes sense. So that's one definition of accessibility. The other definition is appeal. Instead of technical function, it measures more abstract engagement, like enjoyment and interest, which is why this definition crops up most in entertainment. The goal here is to draw in as many people as possible, and has nothing to do with ability. It's strictly about how likely people are to like it. Imagine someone raving about his favorite book from a series. If it sounds interesting, you might ask him how accessible it is, meaning, is it the kind of series anyone can get into, or would it only appeal to hardcore fans? How easy is it to wrap your head around as far as following the story? Do you need to read the other books, or can you jump in on that one? That sort of thing. And not everyone wants to fight for their dinner, alright? Maybe you're a casual reader looking for light entertainment, and you don't want to rack your brain unraveling some convoluted thematic labyrinth. To me, this definition of accessibility is where we get into the crux of the gaming debate, but let's shift gears for a minute. There's been a lot of talk about blockbusters, centered mainly around superhero flicks and the MCU, though not exclusively. The consensus among moviegoers is that when studios prioritize producing films with mass appeal, things that are accessible to the widest audience, the result is often generic and underwhelming. It may be serviceable as mindless entertainment, but artistry and creativity take a back seat, and the fear is of that becoming the norm. Now, for the record, I don't hate blockbusters or think the MCU is trash. I enjoy Marvel shit, I was emotionally invested in the conclusion of Phase 3, and I've been intrigued by what's come out of Phase 4. It's flawed, not irredeemable. I also don't believe all big-budget spectacles are lacking in substance and creativity. But I agree with the general concern that the proliferation of films made seemingly with the primary intent of snarfing down as much money as possible by appealing to as many people as you can with the lowest hanging fruit hurts the industry as a whole. Because over time, less risk will be taken on telling unconventional stories in compelling ways for fear of alienating general audiences. And films that are driven first by expression and craft will continually be crushed by their big brothers because they don't have the same draw or marketing power. Think about it. If people are asked to spend 2 or 3 hours with their ass in a seat watching something they don't know much about, that not many people have seen, and that might be a little weird or confusing, or spend it watching the big flashy thing everyone knows about and is talking about, most of them are going to pick that one. But that's only a problem if you see film as art and filmmaking as an art form. If you see film as a product and filmmaking as a business, then there's no issue, right? Hollywood is making products people want to buy, and that's what a successful business should do. It just so happens that a lot of folks like myself do see films as art, for whatever that word is worth. I won't get into how I feel about art as a concept, and I suspect that art and commercialism have always been at odds to some degree. Maybe they always will be, given how society defines their purpose. An artist's purpose is creation. A business's purpose is profit. Now, obviously, an artist can profit from their creations, just like a business can be artistic in how it profits. But when the goal changes, when an artist no longer produces art for the sake of creation itself, and instead creates to seek profit, they lose respect as an artist. Just like a business gains respect when its goal ceases to be profit alone. The problem with Hollywood, then, is that the film industry is a hybrid, because it's a business fueled by artists. The producers have to make money, and the talent has to make art. In an ideal world, one wouldn't take priority over the other. There'd be an ebb and flow, so everyone is happy. But too often, the money part takes precedent, and the artists are robbed or restrained in an effort to chase mass appeal, to make something the studios see as more accessible. Which brings me back to gaming. First of all, I think there's a bit of a straw man in this debate. So a straw man is basically when you create an argument that's easier to fight than the argument that's actually being made. Just like it's easier to fight a man made of straw than it is to fight a real man, unless the man made of straw is a demon. And I say there's a straw man in the debate because the thing the goodies say the baddies are against isn't actually what they're against. The goodies just say it is because it's an easier position to knock down than the stance the baddies are actually taking. And I know I'm being vague, I promise I'll get to specifics, but I want to take another detour first. And also drink some more, because my throat is drying up like the Earth's bodies of water. Commentary. Earlier in the debate about legalizing weed, say back in the 90s, I picked up on a phenomenon. I noticed that people who smoke weed because they like getting high didn't typically cite that as the reason why they wanted it legalized. Instead, they used its medicinal properties. And if you beautiful bacons haven't noticed, one of my most obnoxious personality traits is that I care about honesty to a fault. So it bothers me when I feel like someone is being insincere. In this case, it was clear how many of those people didn't actually have a strong conviction about the necessity of weed being legalized for the betterment of healthcare. They just piggybacked off that argument because wanting someone to have relief from a medical issue is a harder position for opponents to knock down than wanting to get high. I call that building a tin man. So I was annoyed by what felt like a widespread feigned concern at the time for people with cancer and digestive issues and whatever else for no other reason than it feeling fake. Just say you want weed to be legal because you like smoking it. And over time, my belief that the medicinal angle was being pushed at large by weed smokers who just wanted to ride the coattails of a stronger, less stigmatized point was proven true by the fact that they pushed it less and less the more recreational use became socially acceptable. Now, you'll notice the debate around legalizing weed is championed primarily by people who just come out and say, it's fine to get high, it feels good, and what's wrong with that if it's not hurting anyone? They don't feel the need anymore to make it about something else to legitimize their position. Adults should be free to do drugs is considered a legitimate position by a lot of people at this point. And when dealing with someone who still condemns it, supporters are more likely to jump to the freeing nonviolent drug offenders defense than the medicinal one. Because anything to do with law enforcement and the prison system is going to vibe better with today's social discourse than advancements in healthcare. Anyway, I bring that up because I noticed the same phenomenon from the weed debate back then in what feels like every debate now. Only the legitimate argument people piggyback off today is that disabilities exist. Meaning that if the real reason you want something appears to be frowned upon, you instead claim to want it for the sake of others with limitations you don't have. what about people with disabilities has basically become the new what about people with cancer. And again, because I kind of feel like I'm gonna have to keep saying this, my problem isn't with the argument itself. Of course we should care about the disabled, just like we should care about easing people's pain and improving health outcomes. It's the reason you're using the argument that I take issue with. Like someone will say, I hate restaurants with no drive-through because I can't stand getting out of my car. I don't want to walk to do shit, okay? I don't care if it's 5 feet. Let my lazy ass stay inside. Drive-through should be mandatory at this point. And they'll commiserate with other people who also hate getting out of their cars for equally whiny, though still valid reasons, like not wanting to do their hair or get dressed just to get food, and who also demand that all restaurants be forced to have a drive-through to save them the trouble. But when that guy inevitably comes along and says, restaurants don't need to add a drive-thru just because you're lazy, which is true, but also unnecessary to point out, like you could just mind your business, all of a sudden, all of those people bonding over their petty gripes turn into accessibility advocates. Well, clearly you don't care about people who can't walk. Well, what about people with agoraphobia where going inside the restaurant will trigger them, huh? You know COVID is still a thing and there are immunocompromised people who can literally die by going inside? My God, ableism is so rampant, people like you actually advocate for things being harder. And it doesn't matter that they themselves cited laziness as the reason they want drive-thrus everywhere. If you criticize that reason in a way that makes them feel bad, it will magically disappear and be replaced with these greater concerns they weren't even thinking about 2 seconds ago. Because you can't effectively argue why anyone should be forced to appease your laziness, but you can argue why things should be made easier for people suffering from certain conditions. Not that it's relevant to this, but I especially love when someone uses COVID as an excuse and it's someone who doesn't take COVID seriously at all. They've been running around partying, going to events, no distancing, no masks, no sanitizing or hand washing, no getting tested, even when they show symptoms. But when they get mocked for being so lazy that they order delivery from a place half a block from their house, then they're like, oh my God, but there's a pandemic, I can't go outside. Anyway, the point of those detours was to give you some more context for where I stand on the gaming debate. So let's finally dig into that cake. And also I gotta stretch, my arm feels like it's crumbling. And keep in mind that when I say goodies and baddies here, I'm talking about how each side of the debate has been framed, not how I personally see them. The goodies are the people saying games should be more accessible, while the baddies are saying they shouldn't. Except that's not really what either side is saying, hence the Strawman and Tinman. Because if you're a gamer listening to this, you probably know this debate rears its head strongest, loudest, and mostest when talking about difficulty. Goodies say all games should have an easy mode, and baddies say, no, they shouldn't. As I imagine some of you have already guessed, though probably for the wrong reasons, I'm one of the baddies, and my reason is simple. Video games are a form of art, and I don't support dictating how an artist's work is made. That's all there is to it. Grab your coats at the door, folks. But I don't want to leave it at that. I want to talk about some of the main arguments floating around, so let's start with the goodies. Like I said, their prevailing argument is that all games should have an easy mode or some equivalent, with the main reasons being that it would make games more accessible and that you should be able to play a game however you want. There are other reasons too, but they fall under those umbrellas, so I'll address them as I go. I talked about the two definitions of accessibility, one being usability and the other being appeal. When it comes to gaming, I don't consider difficulty to be a usability issue at all. To me, it falls squarely under appeal, because we're not talking about how a game functions, we're talking about player engagement. If we were talking about how it functions, the debate would center around things like control schemes or the UI or optimization, and it doesn't. Instead, the focus is on whether the game is fun or not. Catering to your personal preference isn't a strong argument for why developers should make their games a certain way, and I think the goodies know that. So in my opinion, they built the Tin Man of usability, claiming that demanding an easy mode is about making games more accessible to the disabled, which in turn builds the straw man that us baddies don't want more people with disabilities playing games. It paints them as inclusive and the rest of us as ableist. And I suspect that, just like with cannabis, they'll continue to push the more credible argument until it becomes socially acceptable to just say they want easier games. Now, I'm not asserting that everyone demanding easy modes is like this. There are people whose chief concern is advocating for the disabled or differently abled, however you want to put it. So the question is, how do I know when a goodie's real reason for wanting an easy mode is to make games more enjoyable for themselves, not necessarily more accessible for others? And I already touched on that. The answer is what they focus on. When they say the debate is about accessibility, but all they talk about is entertainment. How not everybody enjoys hard games, how easy mode allows them to enjoy the story more, how it isn't enjoyable for a game to take forever to get through, how not being able to progress past a certain point because it's hard isn't fun. If it were actually about usability, they'd talk about usability. And if they did talk about it, they'd have nothing to say. Because none of us is out here objecting to making games functionally easier to play. Developers add new accessibility features all the time, and they're praised for that. Some features have been standards for a while, like subtitles and remapping controls, but there's been an uptick in other features too, like colorblind and high contrast modes and text-to-speech. They have audio cues for the visually impaired, visual cues for the hard of hearing, and vibration for people who struggle with both. There's turning off QTEs or simplifying button prompts to accommodate impaired motor skills, removing motion blur for people who get motion sickness, hiding spiders because a phobia is a diagnosable disorder, not just ew, I don't like it, and arachnophobia is one of the most common relevant to gaming. The list of accessibility features being normalized is ever increasing, and contrary to the goodies finger wags, this rampaging faction of selfish gamers who vehemently oppose improvements like these doesn't exist, and it's disingenuous to suggest that it does. That the wealth of gamers like me who don't believe all games should have an easy mode are, in reality, anti-accessibility. Still, none of that addresses my stance on the individual arguments. I just wanted to establish right out of the gate that I don't think this debate is being argued in good faith. I don't think it's really about the disabled. And really, I'm not a fan of people with disabilities being used as props to begin with. So I guess it's fitting that I'm finally getting around to recording this in July, which is Disability Pride Month. So let's dial things in and talk about my position point by point. I already said I don't think a game's difficulty falls under usability because it's more about player engagement than function. Diving deeper into that, the problem is that difficulty is broad and subjective, while usability has more specific, objective measures. Let's say you have to climb a wall to escape an enemy. That's your task. Usability to me means designing the game in a way that makes performing that task as user-friendly as possible from input to output. So there are a few questions you would answer. How well does the game inform you of the need to climb the wall? Does an objective pop up on the screen? Is there a button prompt when you get near it? Does the camera point to it? Is the wall visually distinct in a way that signals that it's climbable? And once you know you need to climb it, how efficiently can you do it? Does it require pushing a button, holding a trigger, flicking a stick? Is the game responsive to that input? Are there potential issues with that input? Like, what if the button to climb is the same button to view items and there's an item near the wall? If you accidentally view that item every time you try to climb, I'd say usability is poor. Or, I'd just say that part of the game is badly designed. And in my opinion, none of that falls under a game's difficulty. We might use the language of difficulty and say, it's too hard to climb the wall because there's an item there, or it's hard to know where you're supposed to go. But those are usability complaints. So the point about making games more accessible in that way can be thrown out. Because like I said, all gamers want games to be more functionally playable. And robust accessibility features is what makes a game more functionally playable for people with special needs, not difficulty modes. Difficulty is about how a developer balances the game's systems to provide the player with a particular experience. There are no objective measures because the experience a developer wants to provide varies from game to game, and how difficulty is defined varies as well. It's been my experience that normal mode or medium mode or standard, whatever's in the middle, represents the ideal balance of the game's systems for the average player. I wouldn't say it's how the game is meant to be played, because every difficulty setting represents how the game is meant to be played on that setting. It's more accurate to say that normal modes best express the whole of what a game has to offer and the way the developer wants to showcase that, independent of a specific player's needs or interests. It's important to remember then that the labels of easy and hard are meaningless on their own because they only exist relative to normal. In one game, easy mode might mean enemies do less damage. In another, it could mean spawning more items. In another, it may change the HUD or give you more lives or infinite stamina. Easy mode, like hard mode, can mean literally anything. The only constant is that the ideal balance provided by normal difficulty is shifted in some way towards being less challenging. So the argument that easy modes make the game more accessible to people with disabilities is flawed, because being less challenging than normal doesn't mean it's less challenging for the disabled. Let's say you have limited mobility in your hands. An easy mode that reveals everything on the map wouldn't address that, because knowing where things are doesn't make it easier to physically navigate to them. Easy modes make the game easier in general, not specifically for the disabled, so why use the disabled as the reason for adding them? Some easy modes make the game harder for people with disabilities. What if you have a visual processing disorder and easy mode adds a bunch of information on the screen that other gamers find useful, but that you find unbearable because it makes it harder to understand what's happening? Insisting that easy modes are better for or necessary for the disabled simply isn't true. Plenty of disabled gamers are capable of completing games on normal and harder, or not completing them on easy because disabilities are diverse. And in instances where an easy mode does help, it's because it helps everyone, not because it provides unique consideration for special needs. So I'm throwing the disabilities argument out altogether to address what I think this debate is really about. Namely, goodies who want everything to have an easy mode because they like easier games. And let me say right off the bat that I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting an easy mode, nor do I care why you want it. Some baddies do mock the goodies and say, you want an easy mode because you suck at games. Even if that's the case, so what? I don't care if you're bad at a game. I'm not your sensei, your sifu, your sabum. I have no vested interest in some stranger striving to improve at a game for personal growth. Do what you want. I'm fantastic at games when I take them seriously. We're not going to talk about what happens when I don't. But even I play on easy mode if I feel like it for all the reasons goodies mention. Maybe I want to progress without trying too hard, like when I took Greedfall for a spin. I put that shit on easy and ran around like a fool. Or maybe I want to focus on the story like I did with Psychonauts 2. After getting a feel for what the game had to offer, I turned invincibility on and didn't think twice about it. I'm also older now, and that comes with a lot of responsibilities. I have a gaming channel, sure, but I don't play games for a living, and that's time I don't get back. So I may just want to get through a game faster to move on to something else. Yet despite jumping into easy modes myself whenever I feel like it, I still wouldn't demand that every game have an easy mode or a god mode, and that goes back to what I said about art, but also about chasing mass appeal. Here, goodies will point a finger at baddies and say, what does it matter if someone else plays a game on easy, especially in a single-player game? It doesn't affect you, it's just an option for those who want it. So let me ask you something. Why does it matter if a single-player game has microtransactions that allow players to pay their way through it instead of progressing organically? Why do so many gamers get so upset about the fact that someone who wants to spend money to make the game easier for themselves has the option to do it? It doesn't affect their game that Manny Moneybags over here leveled up through currency and no one's forcing them to spend, so why do they complain about it all the time? For some, it's the principle of it, right? It's bad to pay for progress. It defeats the spirit of playing the game if you're just gonna skip all the effort and cheat yourself out of the experience. Me? I don't care about that. If you want to fast track through a game in a way that might deprive you of something I find integral to the heart of it, cool, you're not me. Then there are some who make it about income inequality. It isn't fair that people with money can progress faster, and I agree if it gives them an advantage in a multiplayer setting, but in a single-player game, who gives a shit? Why does it matter that someone can finish faster than you because they can afford to? If you feel pressed to keep up with the Joneses in a video game, that's your problem. Talk about balance, not price. Then there are some who make it about exploitation, which I agree with without any caveats. I find it unethical to put greed ahead of social responsibility by preying on players ill-equipped to resist the temptation to spend, though that's not really relevant to my easy mode comparison. But there are some who make it about the industry as a whole, and that's the parallel I want to draw. Does someone else paying for microtransactions in their game affect me personally? No, but it encourages developers to add them, and that affects all of us because it changes the way they approach game design. I've never paid for in-game content a day in my life, minus some cosmetics I bought with Microsoft points that I earned, so nothing came out of my pocket. Yet, despite not indulging in microtransactions myself, they're everywhere now because other people do. More and more, games are being balanced with microtransactions in mind, and content is being carved up not to do the game justice, but to line the devs' pockets in perpetuity. My point is that our individual choices have an influence on the whole, and it isn't isolated to microtransactions. How many studios pulled back from making single-player experiences because of all the other gamers who don't play them, or who do but don't finish them? I'm not the one doing that, yet I get less of what I want as a result of other people's actions. So to answer the question, how does you playing easy mode affect me? It doesn't. But demanding that all games have one does, because that expectation can change the way developers make their games. Tons of incredible titles are made without difficulty modes of any kind. The developer just has a vision and executes it. Those games would be very different if the devs felt forced to integrate an easier version of that vision into it, and it's an extra consideration that may not be conducive to that vision. Obviously, I'm not saying it can't be done, because any number of fantastic games launch with an easy mode or add one later, but that's a choice, and I'm saying that removing that choice limits creative freedom. If every game needs to have an easy mode, then every game needs to be designed in a way that allows for something about it to be made globally less challenging. What happens to games that aren't suited for that? Will they even get made? And when they are, will they be poorly received, drowned out by their more accessible counterparts, the MCUs of gaming? Not to mention that a potential downside to universal demands is carelessness in how they're met. Developers who don't want to be bothered or don't have the time or resources to do it well will throw out half-baked easy modes just to tick that box. It happens with everything else devs think they need to include for mass appeal. Half-hearted open worlds that are empty, meaningless customization you can't even see or do anything with in game, all the garbage battle royale clones, trash games as a service, and refuse horror projects that endeavor to be funny for a shrieking YouTuber to record instead of good. The industry responds to the market, and it isn't just what they see you buying, it's anything that affects what you buy. So what I'm talking about isn't a problem now because people aren't skipping games in droves for not having an easy mode. And it's a demand I don't think the majority of gamers will be making anytime soon, given that challenge is an indelible facet of gaming. Not just electronic gaming, but gaming of all sorts. Part of the point and the fun is earning the win or completion by testing your skill, your knowledge, your speed, your wits. Now, you, as an individual, may not factor those elements into your gaming experience, but that doesn't negate the nature of games as a concept. You don't have to make yourself easier to find when you play hide and seek. You don't have to make yourself easier to catch when you play tag. Even truth or dare isn't meant to be easy, and it'd be boring if it was. I dare you to whistle. Okay. Haha, cool. Board games, backyard games, it doesn't matter. Gaming isn't a passive hobby at its core. The obstacles are as much a part of it as anything else. That's why I don't see all the goodies screaming for easy modes as a creative threat to the gaming industry, at least not yet, because it's an industry based on a hobby where challenge is meaningful. And to be fair, gamers who've been a part of the community for as long and as deeply as I have may appreciate that in a way more casual gamers don't. And that's not me implying that you have to be a casual gamer to think all games should have an easy mode, or that no seasoned gamers would ever want that. I just mean that it's understandable when it comes from someone who hasn't played very long, or who only plays very laid-back games like The Sims or Stardew Valley, and they want to branch out but are finding it difficult. I get the frustrated reflex of saying this should be easier so people like me can do it too. I just don't agree with that across the board, and I'm explaining why. The more demands you make, the more agency you take, and I'm in favor of preserving agency in the arts. So I think it's important to add to that discussion, even if it's going nowhere right now. Let developers implement difficulty modes in their own way, at their own pace. Because easy mode for easy mode's sake won't universally improve accessibility anyway. It'll only increase mass appeal. And while I'm all for making games that lots of people can enjoy, I can't ignore the artistic drawbacks of chasing that over producing unique, formative experiences that may very well have limited appeal. Though let's be real, the appeal of games designed to be hard ain't all that limited. As for the other reason goodies give for thinking all games should have an easy mode, the fact that everyone should be able to play games the way they want, no one is stopping you from playing games the way you want to play them. Some developers just make games that aren't for you, and I think that's okay. It's okay to make films that aren't for you. It's okay to make music that's not for you. It's okay to write books that aren't for you. It's okay to make games that aren't for you. And if you disagree, that's fine. But if you aren't making similar demands for every other creative medium, despite there being plenty about them that isn't accessible, I'd like you to consider in earnest that maybe the reason is because consuming other media is already easy for you. It's easy to listen to a song, to watch a movie, to read a book, but it's not always easy to play a game, even without a disability, and frankly, that can be annoying. Difficulty is what's talked about because that's all this is about for a lot of people. They want games to be as easy to consume as other media so they don't miss out on the entertainment that interests them. That's why so many goodies only roar about making all games easy when really popular games come out that are too hard for them to play. They don't care about the hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of games released in a given year that are also too hard for them to play, or that also don't have easy modes, because they don't want to play them. They want to play Elden Ring. If you're truly concerned about disabilities, then spread the word about developers who push the envelope with accessibility features, like Naughty Dog does, and support indie devs so they have the funds to invest in implementing them too. As for wanting to play a game how you want to play it, I already explained why every game having an easy mode wouldn't address that, considering there's no standard for what an easy mode is, so what's the alternative? Ask game developers to do the same thing we ask other software designers to do. Add more customization, allowing us to toggle things off and on, or adjust them by slider. Look at Dreamscaper. It's an action roguelite RPG sort of thing. A bit too grindy to me if you want to 100% it as far as resource drop rates go, but it's an amazing game. Instead of difficulty modes, it allows you to adjust individual aspects of the game, which subsequently increases or decreases difficulty according to taste. In the main menu, it has a lucid mode option that increases your stats each time you die in case you want extra help. It has aim assist sliders for both melee and ranged attacks. And in-game, when starting a run, you can set 4 different attributes to 3 different levels to adjust the intensity. You can make bosses harder, maps bigger, add more enemies, or increase the damage you take, and you can mix and match those settings. You know, to play the game how you want to play it. Now, I'm still not going to say all developers should do that sort of thing, as if passing judgment on those who don't, just that it's a better way to let players tailor an experience to their own interests, abilities, and skills than slapping the word easy on a mode with fixed attributes. I feel like if the goodies were really that concerned about being able to play their way, they'd talk about that kind of customization more often. Instead, they just scream easy mode, which again makes this whole debate seem like it's really about wanting easier games. Not games more accessible to the disabled, not games that let you have it your way, just games that aren't challenging. Plus, it's a good way to rage bait, right? You go on Twitter and you say, all games should have an easy mode, there's literally no reason not to. Then witness the flood of engagement from people who disagree on the definition of the word no, and all the goodies patting each other on the back for not being toxic bros who think everyone should get good at the expense of the differently abled. And finally, there's the question of cheats. So I remember when you could pop in a cartridge, combo those buttons, and do cool shit. Games definitely weren't as complex back then as the games we have now, so a lot of cheats didn't necessarily change the core game that much. And when they did, there was a consensus among the community that playing with those cheats on wasn't actually playing the game. They were a novelty you fooled around with, but you turned them off when you wanted to play and beat the game for real. It's like a speedrunner exploiting a glitch that lets them fly through a map from start to finish, skipping 90% of the game's content. They wouldn't claim to have played the game in 2 minutes, they'd say they beat the game in 2 minutes, meaning they triggered the end game event, however you put it. Yeah, they played the game to figure out how to glitch it that way in the first place, but you get my drift. Playing a game doesn't just mean reaching the end, it's also how you get there. The journey, not the destination. And how much a cheat affects that depends on the game and the cheat itself. I think there are plenty of games made today that are well suited for cheats, and I'd love to see more of that, only modernized. Because with social media being a thing, there are no fun secrets anymore that you only learn about because your friend told you at school, that she heard from her brother, that his buddy told him that if you jump 3 times and hit BAB, you get blue invincibility armor for the rest of the level, and you get all excited to get home and try it for yourself. Everything is out in the open now, so I think cheats people have to unlock by playing the game and finding them fits better with today's industry as far as maintaining that excitement and intrigue, especially if you don't know how many cheats there are to find or where to find them. The point is, I don't mind cheats, but I believe that in some cases they can make a game unrecognizable and its design completely irrelevant, basically breaking the game. So I agree with developers taking something away to compensate for whatever that cheat added. Like, you can enable God mode, but your game won't count towards achievements, or you won't be able to unlock certain endings. And I don't see that as a punishment for using cheats. I see it as acknowledgement that some cheats break the experience, and the experience matters. Like I said before, I'm not personally invested in your private gaming journey as far as how your settings may affect it, but I freely admit I'd be annoyed by people who try to force the point that their playthrough is as valid as anyone else's, despite playing an iteration of the game so fundamentally distant from its base design that it might as well be a different one. So let me be clear on this point because it's a big one. If you think someone is less of a gamer than you because they play on easier settings, or you feel the need to mock them for it, you're a dick. And your need to preserve this pedestal you've placed yourself on by telling other people they're beneath you means you aren't even a big dick. You're a little dick who never learned how to stand tall without making other people feel small. No offense to little dicks. Besides being mean for no good reason, it isn't true that playing with easier settings makes someone less of a gamer. And listen, I'm not trying to paint myself as an angel here. I won't pretend that I don't gatekeep in some ways. Words have meanings, and I need a better reason to adopt new ones than you wanting to be included. I don't consider that gatekeeping anyway. By that measure, we all gatekeep something. If some guy claimed to be a basketball player because he tossed a mini ball and a mini hoop at Dave & Buster's, I doubt any of you would agree with him because that's not what a basketball player is. So no, we don't have to act like he's the same as LeBron. So, like it or not, the word gamer also has a long-standing meaning with pre-established criteria. We just don't agree on what that is anymore because so many people want to don the hat now. For my part, difficulty isn't a factor. Saying you're less of a gamer because you played something on an easier setting is like saying someone who runs the 5K is less of an athlete than someone who runs the 10K because the distance is shorter. That said, I won't claim that you're the same when it comes to skill or experience because that's also not true. You beating a game in God mode isn't the same as beating it in hardcore permadeath merciless mode. It's not okay for someone to demean you for playing in God mode, but they absolutely don't have to act like what they did isn't a testament to them having a superior mastery of the game. In the same vein, playing on an easier mode that lets you skip a chunk of the experience isn't the same as playing on a mode where you deal with everything the game has to offer. The person who didn't skip any content played the game in full, you didn't. So if people consider their thoughts on the game more valuable than yours, you can be upset about that, but it's warranted. There's nothing wrong with people passionate about a book taking someone who read it more seriously than someone who read the Cliff Notes. I understand that no one wants to feel excluded, but sometimes you need to accept that as a part of reality instead of demanding that everyone set you a place at their table. Nobody needs to belong to everything everywhere all at once. And yes, that was a shameless movie plug. So, to recap my opinion, because I'm as sick of listening to me talk as you are, easy mode in games is great. It just doesn't mean anything on its face. And people shouldn't be put down for wanting them, but demanding that all games have them, while assigning value judgments to it no less, intrudes upon the creative process in a way that I don't support and that doesn't do what you think it does anyway. Not uniquely or universally. And that's all I have to say about that. Now, I do the cliche thing of saying that I'm opening the floor for you to share your thoughts, but you don't need my permission to do that, guys. You can just give me your thoughts whenever. So thanks to all who listen to these ramblings, who watch my gaming videos, and who support me on Patreon. I'm going to post a thank you video at some point. I always want to do it before anything else because I should do that before anything else. But then I'm like, well, let me get the gaming videos out first so they can watch them while I gather info for the thank you. And then getting the videos out takes up all of my free time. And so I don't do the thank you video, and it's a silly cycle I'm hoping to break soon. With that, I love you platonically. Be safe, be well, save our democracy.